Hello, 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 hello. It is your good friend, Wild Philosopher, here once more to remind you that gnomes are real. An especially important memo today, as today we confront one of the dread enemies, promoters of gnome denialism, Doreen Virtue. I have here a group of acquaintances of mine. You've seen a few of them before. One is all new. It's Cloud. And for those who don't know, actually, I didn't pin the stream link, or not stream, video link, but about, what was it, 2 weeks ago? Yeah, 2 weeks ago or so, the Christian commentator Doreen Virtue put together a panelist to accuse the late, great biblical scholar Michael Heiser of everything under the sun, basically. From heresy to false prophethood to like support for racial nationalism to support for the Church of Latter-day Saints and occultism and polytheism or polytheism by implication. Sorry, also what? Sorry?
Gnosticism, that one too.
They accused, yes, Gnosticism. Absolute classic. They basically covered every charge of the heresy hunters with the singular exception of starting a witches' Sabbath. Now, we'll be talking about that. We'll be focusing on a few of them. I think most explicitly the arguments produced by Wave Nunnally and Jordan B. Cooper, unless, of course, maybe with reference to a few other people. And Dr. Cooper recently published a video today denying any relation to everyone else in the video because he apparently had not bothered to look up who Doreen Virtue was prior to agreeing to do a hit piece on her channel. Some excellent discernment. But I bring this up because he said he didn't call Heiser a polytheist. He said he was a polytheist by implication. Which is certainly more polite, but not much more respectful. And thus, we too are not calling anyone polytheists. We're merely imputing polytheism to them by implication.
Yes, we are going to imply a lot of things today.
Yes, this is not going to be on the friendlier stream.
Yeah, no, this is so. I think we've been fairly, I guess, religion adjacent in previous streams. We're like, yeah, let's not get into the huge weeds there. But I think this is more an example of what not to do when you're talking about someone.
Yeah. I'm not a Heiserian. Let's clear this up at the start of the stream. I am not a Heiserite. I'm not a follower. I'm nothing against the dude. But as everyone in this panel will attest, like 9 times out of 10 that his name comes up in connection to something, I go, oh, that's wrong. So very much not a Heiserite, which I'm establishing now because the panelists are defending themselves by accusing their critics of being fanatical defenders of Heiser.
Yeah, like, oh yes, look at those weird cultists over there.
Yes, sorry, that was another charge. Yeah, the cult of Michael Heiser.
If you defend him, you are part of a cult, by the way. Just
yes, precisely. The cult of reading middle of the road works of biblical criticism. Horrible. In fact, I'm so much not even a Heiserite. I'm not even a Christian, which is why when I tell you that this was an archetypal example of how not to treat your enemies, how not to behave towards them intellectually, morally, and linguistically, this should have all the more weight. Because that's not a religious virtue it is a religious virtue I adhere to, because it's a requirement in Judaism, and also in Confucianism, and also in Neoplatonism, and also in Norse heathen neo-paganism, because apparently that's doing a better job at scholarly ethics than what the panel of self-entitled defenders of the Christian faith were putting on in their Loving Thy Enemy session.
When Vikings love their enemies more than Christians do.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Yeah. It has been, I've seen ethics of loving thy enemy defended on several grounds from Norse heathen philosophers and religious writers, on the grounds that it is required from the Havamal's virtue of reciprocity, which is an entirely rational view. I'm not a heathen, but they were absolutely correct when they made that deduction. Strict logic there, which makes this stream all the more unfortunate. So there were a lot of arguments thrown against Michael Heiser. Might be best state, like, if we had to state Michael Heiser's view on the Bible in 3 sentences for the betterment of everyone else watching, because they may not have heard of Michael Heiser, what would be a good way to do it? And would anyone here like to take on that attempt?
Well, the short of it is the divine council worldview. That there's more to your Bible than you know. There are more characters, more players in the game, so to speak, than just angels and demons.
So that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah. So normally in your baby steps into the religious supernatural world, you got demons, right? They're nasty and they show up and they steal your soap. And then you got angels, right? Angels are sent by God. If you start to go on from there, you might add in a middle group of fairies. We love fairies. Fairies are the best. Fairies are bae. In fact, the Bible is a much more complex, much more complex supernatural. Supernatural. We'll use supernatural as the vernacular term here. I know theologians might like to nitpick whether this is supernatural in the sense of being above nature, hyperfues or parafues against nature, or whether it's part of nature. We will be using supernatural throughout this presentation in the vernacular sense of weird, kooky stuff that science can't explain, such as fairies and Bigfoot walking through your walls, and UFOs, if they're not actual spacecrafts, and so on and so forth. And in the case of the Bible, you got the demons. You also got the great forces of chaos, like Leviathan. You have the divine forces of chaos. This is the Old Testament Satan, to be distinguished from the New Testament Satan, arguably. Let me know if you want to say any. Just jump in, Ryan, if you want to say anything, because I see you unmuting and muting.
Oh no, that's fine.
Okay, yeah. As I said, you got demons, you got the forces of chaos, the major players of chaos, Leviathan, Behemoth, and then you have God's tester, like the antagonist, Hashaitan. You have the spirits of you have the fairies, you have the spirits of the mountains, which I think are referenced several places in Ezekiel on the basis of Jewish tradition. And then you have the higher realms. And we're just going to gloss over the question of whether, what the Loch Ness Monster is, or Tannin, sea serpents, Tannin, as distinct from dragons. I know maybe the two are different, yeah. But moving on. You get the higher realms. At the very end, you have messengers. Right? This is what angelos means in Greek. I'm correct about that, yes? Angelos is messenger.
Yeah. It basically means messenger. So
Yeah, messenger.
in
Angelos, yeah.
the Bible, it kind of gets odd because it takes on kind of a different categorization, like a broader categorization to go on.
Yeah, it takes on a much larger cat, and I think that might help here, that a lot of the beings we're about to describe as not an angel are things that you might conventionally want to consider an angel.
Yeah.
Because they tend to get lumped under that category as divine entities.
Yeah.
And in the broader, if we're just talking about like good servants of God, certainly I would say yes, like the seraphim, the cheruvim, the ophanim, the sarim, which is the biblically acceptable term for a pagan divinity, would all fall under the name of angels. But in the strict technical sense in which the Bible is talking about messengers, none of these things are angels because all these things have wills in the way that angels don't. Right? An angel is merely a messenger from the Most High, which not to say that other divine entities don't do that, but that's not their raison d'être. Their Aristotelian telos, as it were. And so the divine council is Heiser articulating what was it, 70 gods?
Well,
the 70 angels, or the 70 angels, sons of God.
Yeah, it's the 70. So it's the sons of God, which we see throughout the Hebrew Bible, and that is a reference to the divine council, the council of gods, which Hashem, the God of Israel, is a member of, but also is king over, because he created them.
Yes.
And the word seven, the number 70, it is a symbolic number. It actually is found at the city. So during the late 1920s, French archaeologists uncovered the remains of a city-state in Syria that was known as Ugarit. And the city had tablets, I think, written in a type of cuneiform, sorta, or it might be a bit like a precursor to like Phoenician or Hebrew. Anyway, they uncovered some tablets written in that language, and the language was very similar to that of the Hebrew Bible, and it helped to solve certain problems and hapax legomenon that were found in the Bible. That's a word denoting a one-time use only of a particular word, with no other reference. But also in this tablet, there was talk, or in these tablets, there was discussions of things, gods, such as El, Baal, Anat, Asherah, and the pantheon of gods that the Ugaridians worshipped, which they called the Bnei Il, or the sons of El, also known as the sons of the gods, because El and Asherah were husband and wife, and they had a host of divine children. And they were usually numbered at 70. And that typically that number represented the number of the gods of the nations, which was a concept the Ugaridians had. And it is an idea that is actually reflected in the Hebrew Bible. So it is a symbol denoting the nations, but also their deities. And it's not a literal number, as if there's literally 70 like fixed borders or something in the world. It's a symbolic number representing the number of nations, or just the nations in general of the world, of the tribes, city-states, territories, whatever, and their national deities. And that's a number and a term you see frequently employed in the Hebrew Bible. And so when that was discovered, scholars made the very shocking remark that the Bible does in fact acknowledge a pantheon of gods.
Yeah, shocking for some.
Well, no, I mean, it's shocking for the general, like, monotheistic West. That was shocking. Hence why we're talking about this stream, because some people still can't accept it.
Well, yeah, as we'll I guess get into this. I knew it was 70 in the Bible, but that was because I have very much approached this topic as a Jew, rather than studying Heiser more directly. And what I mentioned earlier was that 70 figure, connected 70 guardian deity, Sarim of the, or which means prince in Hebrew, 70 princes of the earth, in above mirrored by 70 princes of the earth, below the 70 kings of the nations, and the 70 elders of the Sanhedrin, who are responsible for ruling the Jewish community, all represent these figures. Yes, I saw Sean Schulte asked, so it'd be like 50 representing all the states of the United States, not necessarily the number for its own sake. Yeah. Yeah, it's a symbolic usage, precisely. But yeah, 70 elders representing the 70 princes of the nation, because their legal decisions are not arbitrary, arbitrating for all humanity. So this was a new, as I said, it was news for some people. I know Hound wanted to talk about what you want to talk about. Like you said, yeah, some people didn't want to accept it, and the argument that was used again and again by Cooper, for instance, in the video to which we are referring, routinely emphasized that Heiser is introducing innovations into Scripture, and he is not basing his views in church history. I'm going to be polite here and not make nasty remarks and about church history, and hand the floor to Hound, because I know he wanted to talk about this topic, and I figure best to hammer this right out the gate.
Yeah. All right, so I just pulled up some old docs I had, because way back in the day when I was like really into Heiser, I and some other friends, I believe, General Han Solo, Sentinel Apologetics, put together a list, and I kind of tracked them down later, of just kind of, so what Heiser has is what he calls the Deuteronomy 32 worldview, which is kind of, it talks about Deuteronomy 32, 8 through 9, and Deuteronomy 32:43, I think. It's been a while. Mm-hmm. It's been a hot minute.
Yep.
So there's like a whole list of just church fathers who just like reference this. So interestingly enough, a lot of the early church fathers did not have the Bible we tend to use in the English-speaking West, which is the based on the Masoretic text. So think your King James, New King James, etc., NIV. What they had is the Septuagint, was the Greek translation of the Old Testament. And so when they were reading certain verses, they were reading a alternate textual tradition, and this informed their theology. So we have figures like First Clement saying, for thus it is written, when the Most High divided the nations, he scattered the sons of Adam. He fixed the bounds of the nations according to the angels of God, his people. And Jacob became the portion of the Lord, Israel the lot of his inheritance. Irenaeus in Against Heresies, like book 3, is talking about this, and he's like, yes, he did also make one race of men to dwell upon all the earth, as also Moses declared. When the Most High divided the nations, as he scattered the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the nation after the angels of God. But that people which believes in God is now not under the power of angels, but under the Lord's rule.
Which is Jewish tradition.
What?
That's just Jewish tradition.
Yeah, well, I'll get to that in a second, and I'll let you riff off of that, because you're more familiar with Jewish tradition. So we got Clement of Alexandria, who's like talking about how particular divine ministers contribute to services, for regiments of angels are distributed over nations and cities, and perchance some are assigned to individuals. For by an ancient and divine order, the angels are distributed among the nations, but the glory of those who believe is the Lord's portion. Origen has several on these. I know he's a more controversial figure, but I mean, just to kind of let you know that this is the tradition, and both like really on the nose classic guys like Irenaeus, as well as like, you know, more nominal characters like Origen are citing this. They're citing this. We've got Novatian of Rome talks about, and yet in Deuteronomy we observe God told these things, and that God said, where it is written, when he scattered abroad the children of Adam, he determined the bounds of nations according to the number of the angels of God. I feel like this is going to get boring. There's like Victorinus of Petobium says the same thing, talks about the nations and the number of the angels of God. All of them are quoting this passage. We got pseudo-Clementines. We got, who else we got? We got Rufinus of Aquileia. All of these guys reference this. They all read it, and they're all like, this informs our theology. So Jordan B. Cooper coming in here and being like, oh yeah, this is the Heiser's going away from the tradition. This is like a specific textual reading. He's relying on all these scholars. Kinda iffy. So I sent you this stuff. I got it on the other thing. Do you want to comment on the Jewish tradition here?
Yeah, we can. Before we do, actually, well, I'll take a step back for a moment. So Cooper says he didn't call Heiser a polytheist. He merely imputed that his views are polytheistic.
Great.
That is a brilliant, I will give Cooper credit for multiculturalism. He has mastered the Talmudic method of pill pool. That is brilliant. That was a brilliant. I'm watching his not apology video earlier today, and I'm like, oh, he'd have a tradition as a halachic logician. Wouldn't be long, but it would be a long one because you also have to consider results. But he'd definitely have. He'd do a good job. And his argument is Heiser is accepting the view of textual critics that the Bible is a polytheistic work, where there's this one God, that's God, and he's surrounded by a whole bunch of other gods. And I think Cooper is very much, confusing the letter for the spirit here? Because Heiser is certainly using the letter of academic textual criticism, but he's utterly dissenting from the spirit. Whereas I actually think Cooper, I don't think he's doing this intentionally, but I think Cooper is doing the exact opposite because he's trying to assert the traditional Christian view. But in doing so, he's making it look as if the God/gods do a distinction as any validity, when in fact it's just metaphysical nonsense. Right.
All right.
It's not that there's...
Okay, go on. How would you expand on that? But
Yeah. It's not that there's one God who's just super awesome and he's amazing and he's like the strongest God. God is bigger than the boogeyman and he's ruling over all these other piddly gods. It's what we have here is just an unfortunate coincidence of terminology, but they're two totally different. It's not even that they're two totally different kinds of things, right? The Sarim are a kind of thing, right? Like Apollo, he belongs to the class of Sarim, theoretically. And the Sarim are a kind of thing that can be put alongside, human beings as another kind of thing, with the members of this group fitting under that. Fairies, like, I don't know, that gnome over there, a third category, all kinds of things. God is not a kind of thing. God is the foundation and source of all being. He is the primordial font from which existence comes to be. Heiser was perfectly well aware of this. Like, the divine council in Heiser is not like super cool buff god ruling over less cool or wimpy gods, which would be the case if Heiser were unironically defending the case that like the biblical pantheon and the Ugaritic pantheon are identical, which is frivolous and silly. Heiser is defending the case that God rules through not through other people. Like God's rule is absolute, but God delegates power to other people.
Yeah, actually, I do want to make a comment here.
Sorry, not other people, under people.
He has pointed out even that in the Canaanite material, there is reference, or there is an implication of an even earlier generation of gods that preceded the creator god El and Asherah. So it's not as if really El was this uncreated being. I mean, he was still part of a generation or cycle of gods, which presumably may have gone back to some chaotic source, a la the Greeks or the Mesopotamians or even the Egyptians. So, which is a common feature of the surrounding mythologies. The gods are born out of chaos. There isn't really, it depends on the theology, but I mean, there's not really this overarching creator god. It's chaos meeting, it's the waters of chaos which create the gods and the demons.
Yeah, and this is precisely what Heiser is denying that the Bible's message is.
Yes.
Yeah, well, because it's denied in Genesis 1:1.
Well, Genesis, 1:1, it's a similar notion, but reversed. Yeah. In that God creates out of chaos as a separate entity.
Yeah,
which is interesting, which is very interesting.
He's not arising out of it. He's already there.
He's just like, hey, I'm there. So,
hey guys, but yeah, this isn't just important for correct exegesis of the Bible. This is also important for like holding a correct soteriology. Because man has that co-creative role in Genesis. Like, this is what happens in the fall, is man was created to rule over the Garden of Eden, like heaven on earth. He calls order out of, as Sean said, he calls order out of chaos. Yeah. But man was created to rule heaven to create a heaven on earth, right? He is God's ruler in principio, or not in principio, in suzerainty. Or God's, that's the bad wrong language. He is God's suzerain ruler. Apologies. And so when we're talking about like establishing the divine council on this, an axiomatic firm distinction between the absolute alpha and omega, like source of all creation on the one hand, and on the other hand, like the category of created beings that includes Apollo, Hound of Heaven, and Tiddlywinks the Pixie. This is not simply to have a correct scriptural view, although that's certainly a benefit. This is also to have a view of man's soteriology that isn't singularly nonsensical by virtue of denying, say, that man was intended to have any creative power or capacity for free will. It's all a cosmic mistake that we can like make artworks. Oopsie. Yeah, this is actually a theology, and this is a good segue into like I know you said, it's in the Church Fathers. It's definitely like the reason I accepted Heiser so much, but then also just, I guess, like moved beyond him when I first got into him as a Jew, is this is just the most ordinary Jewish theological perspective conceivable so far as the rabbis are concerned. Like the record of the Talmud records a number of arguments with Greco-Roman philosophers, Gnostics, Christians, etc., about the nature and substance of God and why worship God. And when the Talmud argues with Greco-Roman philosophers or other like polytheists in general, it doesn't show up and argue that like none of these figures exist or that all these figures are evil. It simply asserts that worship of them is evil, and the case made by the rabbis in the Talmud, especially there's a very, very famous Agada involving Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakkai, that these are the servants of God, and basically what you're doing as a polytheist is you are worshiping the king's butler in place of the king. Which, as far as the rabbis were concerned, was absurd because as a human being, you're a prince. You are made in the image of God, and you are the unity of heaven and earth and have the power over all creation. Why are you worshiping the butler? That was the argument levied against polytheism in the Talmud. This argument very much, obviously Jews are not still publishing polemics against Greco-Roman polytheism, but the underlying principles of this remain consistent. They show up again, for instance, in Nachmanides in the 13th century, in treaties such as The Law of the Eternal is Perfect, which is an anti-Christian polemic where he draws on precisely this understanding of the 70 Sarim, of the nations, in his rebuttal to the Christian rejection of the law. And then in his the wedding treaties, also again he draws on the same sort of divine counsel of the absolute supreme being, and then all us little guys within. Einod milvado, there is nothing outside of God. This shows up in the writings of the Hasidei Ashkenaz. It shows up, like, I'm not going to go through, for the same reason of Hound, we could sit here quoting source after source after source for hours. Hound sent me a list of some of his sources on Judaism, and he was citing, like, the Shnei Luchot HaBerit, the Rabbi Hayam ibn Attar. Those are 18th century figures. And you want to talk about how mainstream this is, Chabad.org, which is, like, the biggest outreach organization for Jews, it was like, I'm trying to think, what would be if you had to name a Christian like missionary website that every Christian
got questions.
knows? Okay, a good one.
Okay.
People like Chabad, but like Bishop Barron, Word on Fire. Like it's like the Word on Fire for Jews. Chabad.org just casually has a story where the Baal Shem Tov, a famous 17th century Jewish mystic, engages in battle with the Tsar, the guardian deity of Poland, on behalf of the Jews of Poland, in an attempt to get the king of Poland at the time to the mortal king to be less oppressive to the Jews. So this is so normal in like Jewish theology that you can just find it on missionary websites. Proffering helpful life advice to normal people. Like Hayam ibn Attar, Rabbi Hayam ibn Attar, very famous Kabbalist. The Shnei Luchot HaBerit, very famous work of Kabbalah in the, I want to say, 18th century. There are very good arguments, for instance, that it influenced the position of the Church of Latter-day Saints that we will rule planets after we undergo theosis. A view for which the Latter-day Saints get much flack. Also Dr. Heiser, because Wave Nunnally said that Heiser supports Mormonism. Yeah. Michael doing battle. Yeah. Sorry, Sean says Michael doing battle with the Prince of Persia and Daniel. Precisely. Yeah. Or even Jacob wrestling the angel of Asaph in Genesis. But yeah, Wave Nunnally asserted that Heiser is he used Mormon.
Yonder, may I introduce myself really quickly and then?
Yeah.
Okay, my name is Cloud. I am friends with my 3 friends to defend the man who basically kept me away from being an ancient aliens astronaut theorist. So, context: he was a man. Heiser was working with a guy named Chris White. Chris White made a documentary called Ancient Aliens Debunked. Go watch it. And Heiser was heavily because he was one of the other people debunking the figureheads for the ancient astronaut movement, Zachariah Sitchin. I want to come before anything else. Hound, pull up the clip with Wave Nunnally, please. By the way, this was made by Robert Rao of Sentinel Apologetics.
It was a beautiful meme. It was a beautiful clip.
If
Hound can figure, yeah.
Yeah. So let me find it. Share screen. And
it's going to be under present.
Yeah, let's.
Okay.
All right.
Add the stage.
All right. Let's hope this comes through. Did I?
The other strange bedfellows that we are that he's managed to make is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints,
right?
Because in using different terminology, they come to the same conclusion that we are going to be the God of our own planet. We're going to have our own territory that is ceded to us.
Oh, look at this top here. This is my article published in a Mormon journal. I'm probably the only evangelical that's been published in a Mormon journal critiquing Mormonism. But they actually, yes, they published me in their journal critiquing them. Now, whenever I get the email, are you a Mormon? Do you realize what Mormons are doing with your word? It's like, yeah, I realize that, but show your friends who think that I'm agreeing with Mormons, show them this. If they want information, they'll go home disappointed. If they don't want information, nothing I say is going to matter. They're just going to say what they want to say. So I'm interested in the ones who actually want to learn something.
Yeah, I loved that meme. That was just a murder. That was an absolute murder from Rob Rowe's part.
Yes.
But yeah, like
I just really
Wave.
Briefly, really briefly. If we wouldn't be here if Doreen Virtue would have just went to the Heiser family and asked questions. By the way, she had every opportunity to do this. Just leave it at that.
Yeah.
To correct records. So,
I mean, yeah, that's scholarly virtue, right? You always go and ask the person themselves for clarity before publishing an attack on them. Mm-hmm. Especially if you intend to accuse them of something severe. Like this is general scholarly virtue for totally secular people, like completely irreligious with normal ethical codes. For religious people, for monotheists who take on extra responsibilities when we choose to believe in the one God and that we are made in his image, we have more responsibilities as scholars, because like in a secular context, the worst you can do is accidentally insult someone and then they have to put out like a clarification or something like what we're doing right now. In a religious context, there are much worse consequences that can arise from falsely imputing heretical views to people. Even from like correctly imputing heretical views to people. You do not want to do that unless you are absolutely certain and you would want to be very careful how you would do it, not with weird hatchet jobs on the internet, for instance. But yeah, it is like that clip was just brilliant. It is really funny to me that the LDS planets view gets so much flack when it is like, of all the views that you get from the Church of Latter-day Saints, it is actually the most normal and traditional, because that theosis was in some way connected to the stars or planets goes like all the way back to the 6th century BC. It shows up in Orphic treatises. Like,
No. Continue on, Wild.
oh yeah, like I know 2nd century, 3rd century, 4th century treatises from all sorts of like Jewish, Platonic, even Christian philosophers talking about like theosis as the act of transformation into a star. We can debate like this is the degree to which the Church of Latter-day Saints understands this literally, which might certainly be more problematic. But the absolute
the Church of Latter-day Saints, Mormons, have this habit of trying to use the terminology of the stuff they're reading, and then they shuttle in this weird metaphysics under the radar, where it's like, yes, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. Yes, you'll become gods. What does that mean for them, though? Something very different than the Church Fathers meant, what Heiser meant, all of these. So, yes, it is either disingenuous to equate the two, or it just shows that you understand neither view at all. You've not done the research. Which, like, if you're going to debate with someone, if you're going to be like an apologist or a scholar, you should probably try to understand what they actually believe and how they are using terminology and theology instead of saying, "Oh, this sounds kind of similar."
Well, yeah. I mean, this is in the Hebrew or Aramaic term here is to dan lekaf zehut, to judge on the scales of merit. Listeners may be more familiar with the formulation by Jesus, in all things judge righteously. The the actual term being translated as righteous, in my humble opinion, is sevara, a Aramaic word which is usually translated as reason, but lacks the non-moral connotations of that word in English, which is probably why the gospel writers went for judge righteously. The implication is that one's judicial decisions, and a charge of heresy is very much a judicial decision, should be based on a unity of like a firm commitment, not just to what you think is the truth, but to the investigation of the truth, which means listening to the other person to get a correct idea of like what they believe and are actually trying to say, because language and like reason does not necessarily transmit equally across language, as Hound just noted, with a very practical example. So you have to listen, like understand the person, be fully committed to the truth, in a rational and moral sense, and then you are capable of passing a judicial decision.
Yeah, like that Mormons say we believe in the Trinity. So does that mean that all Orthodox Christians are therefore believing the same thing Mormons do? It's the height of absurdity.
Yeah. Well, that being said, to be fair to the Latter-day Saints, though, you will know that they put that article by Heiser critiquing them on their website.
Super based, I mean.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about good scholarly virtue. Like they're just putting sources that attack them like on their website, so you can just gain access to that. That was why Hillel was considered a more ethical or a more loving man than Shammai, because Hillel would always state everyone who disagreed with him prior to giving his own view on halacha. Whereas, and this is a very important, I guess, Talmudic dispute that you see echoes of in Paul. Sorry, not Talmudic, pre-Talmudic, like but pre-Christian, like first century, late second century, I think about 130, between like the Talmud says that Shammai was objectively more correct, but we follow the halacha of Hillel. It's because, and it mentions that ultimately it's because Hillel's halacha is more compatible with the fallen state of the world, which is why Jews believe that during the Messianic era, we will follow the rulings of Shammai. I know Christians don't believe that. We'll put that aside for the moment. The core distinction, though, in character that led to Hillel to be more sensitive to this fallen state was his humbleness and his willing to state those who disagreed with him. So yeah, like based Latter-day Saints putting up, not as I said, like not Sean posted like Mormon theology as the Netflix adaptation of Christianity, with immense respect to any Latter-day Saint watching this. I'm not especially inclined to disagree. But yeah, that was absolutely an example of like honorable engagement with your intellectual opponents, which that clip from Wave Nunnally was also not demonstrating on his part by wildly conflating two completely opposing views on the basis of a terminological similarity.
Fun.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess wrap up the earlier point, like the divine council is consistently in like both Judaism and it sort of vanished. I haven't seen any medieval Christian, quote to the divine council. Certainly it remained consistent in Judaism basically till today. Like I think the only reason it might not still be current is because of the heavy secularization of the Jewish community. You are likely to get looks of mystification if you walk into your local synagogue and start talking about any of what I've brought up here tonight. And I think, like Cooper, he's seizing on the similarities, I guess, in language between the use of the Heiser's divine council and the academics, and I don't think he's noticing that Heiser is inverting the textual critic view. Heiser is this mad subversive spy who's like snuck his way into the enemy camp.
Guys, he's like the spy from TF2, basically.
Well, he wanted to rescue the thesis from the hands of the critical scholars in order to actually retain the inerrancy, or at least the validity of biblical revelation, while accepting what it had to say. Because the critical scholars, when they see this, they're like, it's an evolution. It's all just, just the natural course of history. And then they can use that as a foundation for, throwing, pot shots at, modern adherence to the Bible. And it's like, it's BS. It's mythology. Whereas Heiser didn't do that, and he actually provided a wider engagement for the rest of the world to partake in, this discussion. Because like most people wouldn't have been aware of this, and really, had it not been for Heiser, most people would not have known how to respond. In my opinion, at least a lot of people would not have.
Oh, they don't. Like I get into arguments with like a lot of secular Jews who they have no Jewish tradition, and they go to they take one biblical criticism class in like university, and their academic just gives them the usual like run of the JEDP rot. It's this is a poetic device, so obviously there's 9 different authors here through multiple strange, completely unproven and unfalsifiable conspiracy theories. And then they come and they mean like, well, obviously the Bible is run by a whole bunch of pagan divinities, and it's just God being written in on top. And I'm like, no, No, and if you had a better basis in your Jewish theology, you would know that.
Yeah.
And yeah, like Heiser was making, you know, I think his goal here wasn't just to, it was to make Christianity re-intelligible. We sometimes talk on this channel like it's not enough simply to state what is or is not the truth, because oftentimes people will deny what you're saying, not because they're being mean or because they have no special interest in honesty, but because they lack the what you call like the capacity or the phenomenological grounding to conceptualize what the problem you're even talking about is in the first place. I've mentioned this before on the channel. I believe I used the example of space in philosophy. Like the idea that some things are acceptable in one place but not acceptable in another. In the case of what Heiser was trying to do, you have two very, very, what you call like almost meme understandings of like monotheism versus polytheism as like one system where you have a whole bunch of gods and it's just super tolerant because you can just keep adding gods endlessly, which, to be clear, is not what polytheism was in basically every area was ever practiced. Like the tolerant polytheist argument is so friggin' funny. Not that aside, and then on the other hand, you have this quote unquote strict monotheism where we basically get rid of all the gods and we just have one other god. And this is just Heiser. What Heiser did was he made intelligible that this is a nonsensical debate. It's a nonsensical debate because the existence or lack thereof of Apollo has nothing to do with the existence of God, right? Or with our commandment to worship Him.
That's what's called a categorical error.
Yeah, it is. It's an absolute, the definition of a category error, like conflating human beings with pebbles. Only far, far worse.
Because human beings and pebbles are still share kind of a vague category.
Well, yeah, we're still
that exist.
Things that exist, things that are semi-physical. God is neither of these. And yeah, he made it intelligible to people that like there's nothing about being a monotheist that necessarily commits you to arguments about whether or not like Tiddlywinks the pixie is out frolicking in the shrubberies. Because you do get this argument a lot, usually in the more frivolous end, but you see it in academia too, where they simply assume that like monotheism is incompatible with any other sort of spiritual entity. And again, like I have to keep saying other here, but that's just a linguistic error because people keep saying it's like it's God and Tiddlywinks the Pixies, when there's just no comparison between the two. And acknowledging that the Tiddlywinks is over there dancing around the shrubbery under the moonlight has no bearing whatsoever in the slightest on your theology. The only thing it might affect is your behavior towards that shrubbery. But that's purely a matter of like normative respect. Not really a theological issue here. And yeah, that was what Heiser was trying to do. And it's kind of ironic that in Cooper's haste to defend systematic theology, he's making the Bible less intelligible. Right, because the average, like if you're Christian and you're listening to this, you probably have some grasp of Christian theology. I'm here to tell you right now that the average person out there on like the internet who just really, really hates Christianity probably does not even know what the Corinthian Creed is. Right? They're not going to know what the Lord's Prayer is. They don't know what the difference is between like Christology and Trinitarian theology. Heaven help, they might know that the Eucharist involves eating a piece of bread. That's going to be it. I cannot count the number of people I've met who had vituperatively anti-Christian stances because they thought the story of Lilith was in the Bible. And it's easy to be fully give credit to where Cooper is due. It's easy to look at things from your perspective, like out into the world of systematic theology, and the people you talk to all know what this is. Because if you're a systematic theologian, you are probably not delivering lectures to like a cabal of Wiccans. And it's easy to lose track of the fact that like the philosophical imagination and the religious literacy of the West has just collapsed. Like it's just totally dead. And so we can certainly critique Heiser. And again, I'm not dying on the hill that everything Heiser said was right, because it wasn't. Heiser was wrong a lot of the time. With immense respect to the man, because he was a good person, as good as any human being can be, you know. Good scholar, did his best.
I mean, I think he achieved what he set out to accomplish. So.
He set a goal. He did it. And, you know, Junji, the Confucian thinker, says that those who know like what their purpose is and set out to achieve it and do so successfully have walked the Tao. Right. The way of the sage, you know, it might be infinitely deep, but it is not unattainable. That is my encomium in brief. But yeah, like he set a goal of making the Bible more intelligible to the type of person. Yeah, Sean says, yeah, collapsed to the point that they believe we've rejected Greek Zeus and substituted our own. Yeah, like it shouldn't be a subject of debate, like whether God and Zeus are, like, because they're just not in the same category. Period. And end of discussion. The whole like one god less argument is the most ridiculous thing you could ever possibly say. And I've had tenured professors argue with me about that one, which just tells you how far we've collapsed here. And this isn't just an issue for Christians, this is an issue for everyone else, including for atheists who just want to have like an accurate understanding of and sympathy towards their religious neighbors. Right. Religious literacy is an absolutely crucial skill. I live in it's a crucial skill for all of us. I think, again, the perspective issue here, it may look a little less crucial if you live in America, in like rural Idaho, and your two options are atheism and Pastor Jim's First Reformed Christian Church. For those of us not living in rural Idaho, but living instead in places like France or Canada or India, where you have like people from wildly different perspectives sharing the same street, having the skills and imagination and scholarly honesty to navigate that is absolutely integral if you want to have a reasonable discussion with any of your neighbors. This is important if you just want to understand them. It's important if you want to talk to them. It's important if you want to convert them. Like, because if you just show up and start saying something that's obviously false about their religion, they're just going to look at you like you're insane. Important in every respect, which is why Cooper's, I guess, what would you call it, like not understanding this or sort of undermining this is so unfortunate.
Yeah, and why do we title this like Christian polytheism? Who are the polytheists at question?
I mean, yeah, maybe not. Yeah, well, Cooper by implication. No, certainly. Like one of the main concern here, actually, for monotheists, is not simply intelligibility. It's also our status as monotheists, right? Because we don't want to work like one of the worst sins you can possibly commit as a monotheist is to worship the supreme being as if he was akin to Tiddlywinks the fairy. Like this, I've mentioned, the two not the same thing. Not like God isn't even a thing. So like no comparison whatsoever. But to then reduce, the Lord of all creation, incarnation of truth and good, to like the mental status of Tiddlywinks the pixie, is in many respects a form of idolatry far worse than actually worshiping Tiddlywinks the pixie. Because the person who worships Tiddlywinks the pixie knows he's a pixie. He knows he's whereas the person who worships God as a pixie is thinking he's worshiping God when he's off worshiping a pixie. The term for this is often called theolatry in Judaism. I know, Hound, you called it, what was it, monopolytheism?
Yeah.
Yeah, from worshiping God as if he were a pagan divinity. And so, yeah, like the real, like, Virtue brings on Wave Nunnally, and he starts talking about he had like early Jewish arguments, and he starts arguing, like, well, the Bible is saying don't even believe in any other gods. It's saying to believe, like, just believe in this God. It's a radical monotheism, he called it. That's not radical monotheism. That's just a very, very limited form of polytheism. Very, very limited. Because it's a polytheistic worldview, but without any of the merits of... well, it's not even divine personalism, though. Because divine personalism... Well, actually, I shouldn't say it isn't divine because there's several different philosophies that go under that name. And now that I think about it, the Christian one is probably distinct from the Jewish understanding. Would any Hound or Ryan, would either of you have a better grasp on what the divine personalism in question is?
I know I got into it at some point, but it's like it has an impact in the back of my
yeah, I'm not familiar with the term.
But yeah.
Like there are, because I know of like 3 or 4 that go under that name.
All right.
But yeah, like if you think that God is a person like any other, yeah. I guess it might be a helpful way to think. It's like, it's instead of understand. So in Christianity, it is very, very, very important that Jesus is fully human and fully divine. Right. He wasn't
controversial. Yep. Go on.
Well, yeah, for those not listening, or for those who are listening to this who have just never studied Christian theology and don't know what, like, Christians, they don't think that Jesus was just God or that he was a person who was like adopted by God or filled with the Holy Spirit, nor do they hold like Al-Ghazali's interpretation of the scriptures, which is that Jesus was seized by a fit of Sufi passion and declared that he was God himself, in the same way that Mansur al-Hallaj did. The Christian view is Jesus was both fully human and fully divine, which is very soteriologically important for Christians because they believe, as do Jews, in the salvation of the body as much as of the soul, contrary to some people who have bizarrely reinterpreted both traditions as being centered around the soul at the expense of the body. And this is, one. I mean, there's several reasons Jesus has to be a person, but it's the important part, however, of Orthodox Christology is that you worship Jesus. Oh yeah, thank you. Sean has clarified that God is another subjective consciousness that we relate to like any other, rather than perfect being, consciousness, and bliss. Yeah, thank you, because I knew there were several distinct forms of. Yes, that would be the one. Yeah, God is another subjective consciousness. God is not another subjective. There is no other, right? When the Bible says there is nothing besides him, or there is no other God beside him, in context, you have to remember that like the ancient polytheists worshipped, like they would worship figures we might think of as gods, Apollo. They would also worship like Tiddlywinks the pixie. and
Or their
unnamed
ancestors.
their ancestors, unnamed mountain spirits, human beings, the king, the state. Assyria, the god Ashur was the state. Like Assyria deified its city as god, as a god.
Yeah, as a sure.
Sure, yeah. When the Bible says there are no other gods besides him, it's not making a statement. I mean, it's making a statement about the nature of God, and that statement is like there is literally nothing else that is divinely comparable in any sense. Like everything else that might exist is under or within, right? Einod milvado. There is nothing outside him.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like in the Christian view, it's, you know, and you have to, the important thing is you have to worship Jesus as a physical person, whereas it's not as important to worship the physical person of Jesus. Right.
Yeah.
And the distinction here can be emphasized if you remember that the elements of worship of Jesus for Christians are also going to include the Eucharist, which is obviously not Jesus's literal body. It's a piece of bread. And also man as a, what would be the exact language Christians use to describe the man-Jesus relationship?
Hypostatic union.
No, like man. I know the microcosmic, macrocosmic that you might use in a Platonic sense, and the Islamic Nur Muhammad. The exact theological term in Christianity is momentarily flown my mind.
The body of Christ. Temple of the Holy Spirit. What do we?
Like the view that when man engages in the divine life and attains theosis, he is doing so with Jesus as his model.
Participation.
Yeah, divine participation. Yeah, you're participating in the body of, but again, obviously not like the literal body somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
It's the important part is to understand it as a physical body.
Yeah.
Whereas what we have here is a sort of reductio where we're simply worshiping the body. And so, yeah, the polytheist in the title is, I mean, maybe not everyone on the panel. I'm not going to throw everyone under the bus all at once, even if that was horribly slanderous behavior. But like Doreen Virtue has very much relegated God to a pixie. And Cooper has done so by implication.
That's a burn right there.
Yeah, I mean, he released a video. I will say I don't follow internet drama closely. Like I wasn't browsing social media to see what people were saying about this. So I will say he had a couple points that like people were simply saying that he was necessarily in agreement with the rest of the panelists and asking for an apology because of that. I agree with him that that's silly. That being said, the fact that he said he never looked up Doreen Virtue's channel prior to agreeing to appear on it, maybe he's not responsible for what's on her channel, but that is not good behavior. It's not like good scholarly you look at the place that you're going and see like what kind of place is it before you show up and lecture there. Right. So for instance, I bring people to lecture onto this channel. A couple of them are here now. There's also Matt. I have somebody else coming on Sunday. This is a channel dedicated to the exploration of religious epistemology. Right. In that context, I'm going to bring on all sorts of people with very uncomfortable views. Right. Not because I agree with them, but because this is the type of channel where we do stuff like that. Would you want to appear on this channel if you are the type of person who thinks that like studying Hindu theology or like Buddhist deity yoga is intrinsically evil? I would say no. Right. I'm going to say like you probably, if I give you an invite and you're that type of person and you see like just politely decline. I'm not saying this to be mean. It's just this isn't the sort of place that would be best for you. Much in the same way that Doreen Virtue's channel is not the kind of place I would like personally go to. Like 5 minutes browsing of the type of videos she's produced would be more than sufficient to tell you what would happen in any video of hers you agreed to show him.
She would call you like a demon worshiper or something.
She probably would. But it is really fun. Like, I guess I sort of have my point proved here, because, like, Ryan, you sent me a video she did stating that, like, Christians are completely immune to demon possession.
Well, I think that's citing her views on deliverance ministries, because she's a cessationist, so she doesn't believe miracles are being done anymore. After certain, I don't know, comments and or statements in the New Testament, in the Pauline epistles.
Yeah.
And she's like, you can't have visions. Visions are demonic. You can't have this or that. Yeah.
So
I don't know about her views on that, though, on demonic possession. I just don't think she believes in it's possible anymore. Maybe. I don't know.
Okay. So, because there are two, I guess there's two different currents there. The one that says it's impossible, and then there's the one that, like, I see some people assert that, like, just because you are a member of the Christian church, therefore you are, like, automatically exempt from this sort of thing, which is a gross misunderstanding of the nature of faith. And, like, what it means to have faith, it's not intellectual assent or belief in a proposition. It is a existential trust, and you cannot be certain. At least if you think you are certain, you are probably not the type of person who actually has faith in God. Right. Because the sort of person who would have faith in God would be, like, not that arrogant or that prideful. I guess it was a bit of a digression there. But yeah, like, the polytheism in the title is, again, this sort of lowering of God. That to me was the big worry. Again, I don't, be full. I don't think Cooper is doing this in like I've been saying, by implication, partially meanly. That being, it is also accurate, though, that, like, I think if Cooper were here now, he would be vociferously denying the charge, right? And to be fair, he's perfectly, like, rationally, like, in terms of his consciousness, he's correct. It is what he's doing by implication, mostly from the listener's perspective, but partially from even just what he's saying in terms of, like, how he's interpreting Heiser.
All right.
But yeah, it's like it is polytheism by implication. And for monotheists, like, obviously, for monotheists is much more worrisome than it would be for anyone listening to this who isn't a monotheist. Did we want to go further in that, or did we want to target the last, I guess, major issue? Because I guess it is sort of related if we're talking about monotheistic lives. Cooper, you want to...
The kind of anti-supernaturalist bent.
Yeah, like the sort of cessationist. I don't think Cooper's a cessationist because he's I shouldn't say that because he's Lutheran, because a lot of religious diversity in Lutheranism, but they were always the cool ones when it came to engaging in magic combat. Thank you, Hegel. Like channeling the world soul, manipulating magnetic fluid. Lutheran history is just really fun. I love, like, talk about church history. I love Lutheran church history. Stuff's great. Yeah, the anti-supernatural bent. Cooper makes a big deal out of Heiser's interest in the supernatural. And again, I think Heiser is using these terms in a more vernacular sense, right? Like, we can go over the theological terminology of, Hooper Fuez, Fuez, above nature, against nature, right? For as far as John Smith in Nowheresville or New York or whatever is concerned, the supernatural is just weird, unexplainable stuff. And that's just going to include, like, it'll include all the obvious suspects, like ghosts, Bigfoot walking through walls, spacecraft, astral projection. It'll also include sightings of Jesus, right? Sightings of the Virgin Mary, like stigmata, as when the nails of the crucifix appear on your hands and legs.
Well, yeah, the wounds of the Passion.
Yeah, wounds of the Passion. Sorry, Sean says confessional Lutherans are cessationists by necessity. Huh. Okay. Evidently, there's just a lot of major Lutheran philosophers who were not in line with the confessional view. But that aside, I think cessationism is highly unfortunate. Not in the sense that I think we should all be going out and doing miracles, but in terms of what it entails by implication.
So what are the implications?
Like, Cooper makes a big deal out of it. He keeps saying Heiser and his fans want to live in a fantasy world. They want to live in a... and he's using fantasy in a...
Pejorative sense?
Purely pejorative sense, yeah. My worry here is very... And this is actually like a... I know in practical terms what Cooper wrote about, like the nature of God, might be more worrisome. To me, the much more worrisome is Cooper's rejection of the fantastic. Like the primordial impulse of fantasy, and this is in the name, like the fantasy, the fantastic. I know, like, you might not think there's much to this name nowadays, given that most fantasies are Tolkien clones, but fantasy literature historically was very much an encounter with the fantastic, a transcendent force that punctures through the comfortable boundaries of our world and upends it entirely. Right. This was how Tolkien wrote fantasy. This was how Lewis wrote fantasy. This was how MacDonald wrote fantasy. This was how Dunsany wrote fantasy. This was even how Lovecraft wrote. Like, people forget he was a solid fantasy writer. Like Mackin, all the really great fantasy writers were aiming to write fantastic literature. In Arthur Mackin's case, he even tried to induce ecstatic trances in his readers. But that's one of the... And he was very pious, but very idiosyncratic Anglican. So one of the weirder figures in fantasy literature. Charles Williams, again, tried to, like fantastic literature. This longing for the transcendent or the miraculous is precisely the basis of soteriology in, like, any profound sense. Like, the real worry here is not that we're not going to be, like, walking around doing faith healing or casting demons out with our bare hands or waving a snake around, which is cool, but, biblically extraneous. The real worry here is that we will no longer prove receptive to miracles. And what was man's salvation through Jesus' death on the cross? Nothing if not a miracle. Right, working not just at that moment in time, but at all moments in time for all Christians. Right, and I'm not a Christian, but I am a perennially inclined, and I would much rather live in the type of world where people do believe in miracles and in their transformative impact. Maybe not whatever miracles they happen to believe in, because there are absolutely some that are better than others. But that is another issue, because you can say, you can talk about the lack of miracles from a Christian perspective as much as you want, but if people keep experiencing or longing for the miraculous, they're just going to ignore you. You want to talk about why the occult and New Age and whatever is so booming so wildly? You can look at the totally unfantastic nature of amongst many other issues, like to be totally fair, but the totally unfantastic nature of cessationist evangelicalism.
Versus Pentecostalism, which has boomed.
Well, yeah, why is Pentecostalism growing? Like, I'm not a Pentecostal. I actually think I probably have more issues with Pentecostals than I have with the Latter-day Saints, if I'm being bluntly honest here. But that is why Pentecostalism is booming. Yeah, it's not because faith healing is so great on its own, because it puts people in touch with that longing for the miraculous that is the root of salvation in God. And Cooper is he's just denying that people can go on an adventure. Like, it is the most depressing vision of Christianity conceivable. So I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that. Anyone here?
I think I get your critique. Yeah, I think we should not kind of knee-jerk reject Fantasy of the Fantastic. Did you want to go off on the tangent? Because I know you just went on like some massive rabbit trail because you're like, because the whole thing with the Nephilim went down in that.
Did I want to go on a tangent about the Nephilim or
Yeah, I know you're
Nephilic
right.
values?
Stuff about that.
We could. We have done a video on the Nephilim.
Yeah.
It's still there if people want to check it out. So I don't want to do. I set out to write all my objections to Cooper in 2 essays. It took 4 straight days, and I wrote over 8,000 words and barely finished 1 essay. Only on the I didn't even get to most of the arguments. I just presented on like the nature of theology and monotheism, which would have been essay 2. But essay 1 was very much on the Nephilim. I'm going to gloss over, like very briefly, the Nephilim are they're the demigods. They're the children of the sons of Elohim and man. They were men of renown. They were men dedicated to the name in the Hebrew, which in context refer like their own personal name or glory. And this led them to commit horrible atrocities against other people. For those who might wonder why the Bible says these sort of things, you are welcome to read the narrative on Heracles in Apollodorus's library. It is one of the most... I'll refrain from making grotesquely morally judgmental statements, but let's just say I think academics are grossly mistaken when they call Heracles a kingdom builder. He was a kingdom destroyer. And a destroyer of all the people in those kingdoms. And a destroyer of the woman in those kingdoms in a much more than physical sense. Yeah, it's a delightful narrative. Amongst, like, certain, you could talk about Achilles. We went over much of this stuff in the stream. So, did you want to say something, Ryan? Or
Nah.
Okay. But yeah, God, well, just to save time, because we could be here for hours. Like, I wrote 8,000 words, and I'm like 8,000 words, and I'm like, I have not even covered a third of all my material on the Nephilim, which is why it was really weird to me that Jordan Cooper was so offended with like Heiser's views on the Nephilim, because it's like, this seems to be the least controversial part of Heiser's oeuvre.
Considering the nature of the Beneo Elohim in Job 6 and 7. Job 38 verses 6 and 7. So if you were just even to do like a simple biblical glance and you didn't want to use extra biblical traditions, you would still come out with a Heiser worldview. It's just this is
that's the thing. We've been comparing to tradition. Heiser actually, like, he was a Protestant and he didn't use tradition.
Yeah, I think So this is the interesting thing, right? Because I watched one of like Cooper's earlier videos a while back, and his critique of one of his big critiques of Heiser was Heiser's kind of bone to pick with tradition in general. And I think on its surface, that was a valid critique, because Heiser's like, the church fathers, the rabbis, like, let's just go to the ancient Near East. Let's not deal with those. Whereas if you get into it, those actually support the views that he espoused a lot of the time. These, at least, like the views of the Nephilim, views of the divine council, Deuteronomy 32, they're just there, and would have bolstered that, which feels like so ironic that Cooper is in here and saying, I want to stick to tradition.
Yeah, I mean, it is, on the one hand, it's ironic, like on Cooper's angle. And then on the other hand, we can critique Heiser. On the other hand, I think it speaks volumes that even without relying on any Jewish or Christian tradition, Heiser managed to validate both.
Yeah.
Like without, and that's the thing about, like, every time we would present a Heiser argument, I'd be like, oh yeah, I know that one. That's in Rashi. Right. Oh yeah, I know that one. That's in Shnei Luchot HaBerit. Oh, the Maharal mentions that in his Bir HaGolah. Heiser never read any of this stuff. he never meant, like, Heiser's views on Judaism are, I won't say they're bizarre because they're pretty normal, but like, he was not a scholar of Jewish traditions. Let's put it that way.
Ironically, he had the most Protestant approach to the Bible.
Yeah.
He had the most sola scriptura take ever.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, he did end up vetting it, and that to me, like, you know,
he did it with the weights on.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you can do it with the weights on, that's even more impressive than doing it like that. And it just makes it so much harder, especially if you are defending that biblical or that Jewish or Christian tradition to somebody who wants to reject it, right? Because now you can point to, like, well, this guy held the same thing, and he never never looked at Jewish tradition writings at all and thought that Jews were just suffering trauma from the destruction of the first temple, and so they, like, invented a massive legal codicil. Like, that's his argument in the unseen realm for the existence of sola fide in the Bible, is the trauma of the first exilic, the first exile. Like, it just speaks volumes of his non-knowledge. Not to be too critical here. Like, it's not like I have an in-depth knowledge on Theravada Buddhism, for instance, and yet Theravada Buddhists might still conclude I'm in substantial agreement with them. But yeah, like, just speaks volumes on the actual, I won't say obviousness, but obviousness of Heiser's conclusions here.
Yeah. I think if you're doing something, you arrive at it through a very limited selection of data, and then there are beside that 2 other streams of data which also support that reading. That's just like, so. Well, I think
actually 4. Because Heiser could also have defended his conclusions from, like, Neoplatonism and Manichaeism. Which, like that's just how much agreement there was. I've seen 2nd century Sumerian texts quoting, like, this the view that Heiser attributes to the Bible on the Nephilim. Like, that's just how much agreement there was on this topic in between, like, between the 8th century BC and the end of the late antique period in the 6th century AD.
But Yandar, we all know the only tradition is St. Augustine.
Yes, but, like, you can, if anyone who wants to argue with me, like, or like, look into the look up the John C. Reeves Jewish lore and Manichaean cosmogony on the Nephilim in Manichaeism. And what Reeves doesn't note is Manny may have had access to a copy of the Jewish Book of Giants, but Manny really, really, really disliked Jews and refused to read any other Jewish sources. And yet Manny managed to reach an identical theory. Well, not identical. So there are major, major divergences because Manny has this weird dualistic struggle involving all sorts of other fun and exciting things. But in the main, his reading is substantially in agreement once we adjust for the rather profound theological differences otherwise. And he's a 4th century Judeo-Christian Zoroastrian Sumerizer, founding his own religion in the middle of nowhere. So Heiser, he could have defended his views from so many traditions and buttress. That's why I said I'm writing 8,000 words and I haven't even gotten started on the Book of Enoch. Finally, I've just been talking about the Bible and the Iliad. And even then I didn't deep dive into the Iliad. I simply looked at the broad strokes. But I could have gone on. Chaos is going to bed. Or Ryan's going to bed for the night. Sorry, messaged me. Yeah. Oops. Ryan's. Sean says, hopefully they didn't come around the same way Planet Life. Yeah. Yeah, man. Manichaeans, man. Sorry, what was I in the middle of saying when I cut off?
We were talking about how Manny arrived at his views, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, my only point here is Heiser didn't use traditions. He stuck purely to scripture, but he very much could have. And he would have reached using Christian, using Jewish, using Manichaean, using Neoplatonic, using Orphic. They're very consistent narrative on the Nephilim / heroes from the 8th. I mean, I think the Bible is older than the 8th century, but to be purely secular here, from the 8th century on. There's almost, and if anything, it's weird. Cooper's views are the ones that are totally outside of history, church history.
Yeah.
Because they're not simply they're contradicting the church fathers. They're also just contradicting every element of the text itself. And I know scripture is important to every branch of Christianity, but should be especially important to a Lutheran. You'd think. This was also, I was sitting there, I'm this is a really weird throwdown though for a Lutheran to get into. Because not that they care nothing about church history, but they are sola scriptura. They have yeah. Yeah, Patui says, I only regret I couldn't join and whine about fellow Lutheran. Dr. Cooper, whining about fellow Lutherans is a long-standing Lutheran tradition. Yeah, it was a little, I know Lutherans aren't radically anti-traditional in the way that, Pastor Jim's First Reformed Bible Church might be. But they are still sola scriptura, which made Cooper's arguments just rather strange, I guess on the surface. Especially given the lack of any soterial. Well, actually, we should get into that. We should get not that I think you're going to hell if you don't believe in the Nephilim, because that would be stupid. But so the Nephilim, sons of the Elohim, which I'm using that term. So for those unfamiliar, I'm using a variant term to avoid blaspheming by implication. Sons of the Elohim and the daughters of man. They were the mighty ones. In spite of their semi-divine nature, they had the status of mortals. This is in Gen 6.3. They have the status of mortals. And the term Nephil implies both fallen, that's its literal meaning, and gigantesque. Of great stature. It is a very transparent reference to the Greek, to the pan-Mediterranean cult of the heroes, the Heroon, which was fundamentally rooted in that Rar, that Cleon, that is the Greek term here. Kleos aptheton, name of immortality. Yeah, it's not lack of true knowledge of the Nephilim that would damn someone, but hatred of true knowledge of the Nephilim that would damn someone. Yeah. But the primal sin of the Nephilim, of course, was, as we argued at length in our earlier video, which I might have to do a sequel for, because I'm looking at all my material and I'm like, Ryan and I could have gone on for 6 more hours on this topic. Holy moly, we could have gone on that topic. The sin of the Nephilim, it wasn't the desire, the longing for immortality per se. Because, like, I mean, just not even a chapter, like half a chapter before, we're told that Enoch attained immortality. And the Bible doesn't use any, like, it's like Enoch just, there he was, and then he was gone. Off he goes.
He was translated.
With the God. Yeah, he was translated. No, Enoch walked with God and was no more, for God had taken him. It's that their understanding of immortality was fundamentally predicated on personal glory. Right. You see this in Gilgamesh, where he harms his own people for his own sense of renown, and is even willing to test strange drugs on them. He's like, so Gilgamesh, he goes, like, after he goes off and he kills Humbaba for glory, and further archaeological discoveries of the Epic of Gilgamesh has made clear that what a horrible murder and betrayal that was, because not only was Humbaba not some malignant dark creature, he was actually close friends with Enkidu.
Mm.
And then Gilgamesh and Enkidu just show up and they're like, yeah, we need the fame, the imperishable name. And so they just and then they just murder him. Yeah, wanting to make a name for themselves. Yeah, and they murder Humbaba. And then they kill Humbaba's children, who again were equally harmless of any wrongdoing to anyone. And then they destroy the forest, which is, I mean, it's a forest. It's also it's a habitation of the gods, right? In the Babylonian epic. We, of course, laying aside all monotheism, like, this is just committing horrible impiety, like destroying the home of the gods for your name. So they return. Some stuff happens with Ishtar, and she sends a bull. And then everyone knows Enkidu, after Gilgamesh and Enkidu kill the bull, Enkidu chucks the bull's shoulder at Ishtar. And in rage, she strikes down Enkidu. Gilgamesh is very distraught. So he goes off. The rest of the narrative is Gilgamesh's attempt to gain freedom from death, like true immortality, which fails when he proves incapable even of not being able to sleep. But the immortal Utnapishtim takes mercy on him and tells him where he might find a herb of youth. Gilgamesh gets that herb of youth, but instead of just eating it, he decides he's going to test it on a random citizen of his own city. So yeah, he wants to test weird because he's not sure what it'll do. So he wants to test weird experimental drugs on his people rather than taking a risk himself. And this is a continuous theme, not the drugs, but that Gilgamesh is willing to harm his own people for his own glory. This is why the gods sent him Enkidu in the first place. And the gods, they send a snake, which in a pan-Mediterranean context is a sort of guardian of the tree of life, and thus of the sort of herbs of immortality /youth /rebirth, depending on your tradition, location, etc. And it eats the herb, so Gilgamesh can't benefit from it. Because Gilgamesh he's not worthy of immortal life, he's not even worthy of youth. Yeah, take the jab for Gilgamesh. He's basically engaged in dubious medical testing. And the Sumerians were very proud of their medical tradition, would probably have seen precisely that same reading in the text. Obviously not jabs, because they knew that, but that like experimental drug testing on the people when Gilgamesh is the king, and in the end the king's duty is to be the guard over the people. So it's this absolute pursuit of the name at the complete expense of like your status as divine ruler, right? Like, I mean, Gilgamesh is king, but in the case of man generally is, he's not the ruler, but he's the suzerain ruler of creation, like in between heaven and earth, right?
Yeah.
And so you can talk about committing the same sin when you experiment with the creation, laying aside questions of animal experimentation for the moment, because that's a morally different matter.
Mm-hmm.
Not in the sense that it's right or wrong, just in the sense that there's different moral factors at play, so it's not commensurate. This sin of the Nephilim, this desire for fame, it's maybe not identical to the sin that Jesus routinely denounced as Pharisaism, but it's nearly identical or very similar. Because like Jesus's diatribe, I mean, there's a lot going on in the Gospels, and it would be a mistake to reductio it down to one thing. But the core argument of Jesus's complaint that he reiterates again and again and again is that you do good things to seem good, not to be good. Like the concern here is not character. It's not like, it's the famous quote of Jeremiah, I will engrave the law on your heart, and then you will be a people unto me. The word engrave, or the word character in English comes from the Greek word to engrave. Right, I'm going to mispronounce this here, charasign. Charasign. I don't speak Greek. Charasign. Not obviously not to say that Jeremiah is using the word the same way, but there's like it's engrave it upon your heart. That is the point of moral endeavor, not to seem good, or do good, or talk about how pious you are, which is the religious equivalent of nephilic behavior, shall we say. It's less obviously destructive than what the Nephilim were doing, because of course in their case that involved a substantial amount of murder and doing it with women without their consent. Fun times. But yeah, like that was when we mentioned the sort of nephilic sin. At the end of our video, our ultimate conclusion was, why are the Nephilim relevant? It's not because like you're damned to hell if you don't believe in giants in scripture. It's not because those giants are still, you have to believe that those giants are still running around today. They might be, they might not be. That's just irrelevant to the point. The problem with like avoiding the Nephilim in scripture is really like phenomenological. It's avoiding why it's a problem in the first place. Right. And replicating the sin by seeming good and not being good.
Aha.
Or talking, triumphantly about how good you are.
And so how does this wrap back around to Doreen Virtue and Cooper?
Yeah. So Doreen Virtue, she has concerns about Heiser, was the name of the video. I mean, it was a little bit longer, but that was the threat. Concerns about Heiser. She starts off saying this is not a personal attack on Michael Heiser, moments before, as I said at the start, and we'll reiterate, accusing him of literally every heresy or every sort of heretical sin conceivable, from like false prophethood to Gnosticism to racial nationalism to I can't even, like, it was a really just long list. I was just impressed they didn't, like, they stuck to accusing him of interest in the occult and didn't accuse him of actually being like a practicing witch and then break out the Dominican manuals. Because certain, like, there were instances, like, especially when they started with like the Latter-day Saints and gods on planets, and I'm like, what? This is at best. Yeah, Patui says, my concern is they seem to attack an they attack an imaginary make-believe version of Heiser, like devotee of 19th century religions, Geschichte Heiser. That's certainly there. And I guess that's the sort of, like, it's an imaginary version. That's bad enough. What's even worse is they're accusing the man of being a false prophet, which carries the death penalty in the Bible. Like, it is not that they were planning to attack the dude, but most Christian traditions interpret the death penalty in the Bible as a more serious theological sin than to that which you receive lashes. Yes, I also don't believe in the Heiser they don't believe in. Yeah. Like they invented a make-believe version of Heiser, and then they attacked it. And they didn't just attack it. Like, if I invent, so let's say I write a lengthy and vituperative treatise against Ibn Sina, and I argue extensively that Ibn Sina's understanding of the spiritual body is wrong. But I've totally strawman his views, and this happens very often because people confuse Ibn Sina's spiritual body with like the Gnostic non-body, which they're not. Ibn Sina was not some sort of Islamic Gnostic, but I just attack this false view. I'm just guilty of making a straw man. If I then accuse Ibn Sina of heresy, false prophethood, and Gnosticism on top, I'm now not just making a straw man, I'm attacking the seeming rather than the actual being of Ibn Sina in the most vituperative language possible. And at that point, it shifts from one type of sin to another and altogether worse.
Yeah, that's slander.
Yeah, that's grotesque slander, right?
Yeah.
Soteriological slander. In Islam, you can be dismissed as a judge for that, and in Judaism. Like, if you pass a heresy charge and you are just stunningly incorrect, you are not fit to be a judge, amongst other more serious penalties. But the not being fit to be a judge is the theologically integral component, because you are basically just in error about the nature of reality. And the concern of Muslims, who I'm going to draw from here, because not that I'm a Muslim or like Islam, but it's easier to put this in their point I'm trying to make in their language, is that takfiri, or takfirism, which is the aggressive accusation of heresy to the exclusion of, say, accuracy or normative commitments, is very much an aiming at seeming good rather than being good. Because the proper judge as I said, as far as the Islamic world is concerned, and maybe we don't want to have high standards as Muslims do. We can have lower ones.
Let's lower the bar here.
Let's lower the bar. Like, the judge, when the judge takes on the authority to pass judicial decisions, walayat, he takes on like guardianship, but that authority is the authority of God. The judge is aiming to embody God in a way that the shoemaker is not, because the shoemaker does not hold life and death in his hands. And if you want to talk about a Christian basis, this is what Jesus is referring to when he talks about binding and loosing. Right? I always confuse it. Is that Mark or Matthew 16, 18, 19?
It's probably Matthew.
It's
Actually, do we want to tie this all the way back to Psalm 82? How long will you judge unjustly?
I was thinking we'd end in the next 10 minutes or so because
Yeah.
2 hours. Yeah. So we can sort of talk. But yeah, like binding and when God, Jesus, God, Christians think Jesus is God. He gives the church the authority to bind and loose. That is the authority to make the decisions of life and death. That is a heresy trial, right?
Yeah.
Like what is orthodox and what is not orthodox, what is wrong or heretical. And the worry that Muslims had about takfiri is when the judge is making judicial decisions left and right and accusing this guy of heresy and that guy of heresy, and he has no concern for honesty, like he has no concern for God as truth. He also has no concern for, God as the source of morality. The individual is clearly not behaving in line with the moral norms expected of, judging righteously. And thus the Islamic deduction is he is what Jesus would call a Pharisee because he's interested in seeming good and not in being good.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So why would I bring up this element of the Nephilim? It's because if Doreen Virtue wants to find the continuing relevance of the Nephilim in church history, Doreen Virtue can rewatch her own video. I'm just going to I try to avoid being rude, but once you start accusing people of heresy and Gnosticism and being a false prophet, it's all gloves are off. All gloves are off at that point. Like,
yeah,
you have lost, as you have believed, so shall you be done by. Yeah.
Who watches the watchers? Who inquisits the heresiologists?
Yeah. Whereas there is a sword of Damocles hovering over the ruler's head. Discernment Ministries embodies the spirit of the Nephilim. But yeah, like you want to talk about, Cooper kept asking, where are the Nephilim in church history? We mentioned where the Nephilim are in like the church historians, but oftentimes the Nephilim show up in the history of the church.
Sometimes
not exclusively.
On YouTube videos.
Sometimes on YouTube videos, yes. Sometimes on YouTube videos. Who watches the watchers? Be reflexive. And it genuinely drives me nuts to even have to have these arguments because of just how much of his time Jesus spent like precisely attacking this one sin. I think if there was anyone I wouldn't have to have it with, it would be people who followed the teachings of Jesus publicly on and made channels talking about why they're the best and you should follow them and what the correct interpretation of them is. C'est quoi c'est? Yeah. Did you want to end with binding and loosing, or would you like to, or end Psalm 82, or are we good? Like that was all. My issue is I think they basically crippled our ability to engage with scripture.
I mean, I think I can kind of draw it back.
Which is that
one of the big passages Heiser talks of is Psalm 82, which is specifically about not judging unjustly. Now, I think there's developments in scholarship, like even before and since Heiser, that haven't been brought to bear on that. And like you talked earlier about like the Sanhedrin representing the 70, right?
Yes.
There's like a heavenly court and a earthly judicial court. And when Jesus gives the power to bind and loose, he says, as you bind on earth, so it will be bound in heaven, right? That's who's he talking about there? Like, I mean, the Sanhedrin had the power to bind and loose, right? The earthly rabbinic courts.
Well, yeah. I mean, the Jews still claim that power. That was my whole point about the Baal Shem Tov.
Yeah. So this is so there that it's kind of a human and a divine thing, right? There's like parallels to Psalm 82 in like the legend of Kerith, ancient Near Eastern literature, where it's like the king is ruling unjustly. He's like this human divine figure, the son of the gods, right? It's basically an Nephilim. And it's like, why would I die? I'm the son of a god. But no, they'll die like men. But we kind of take up that role. We are the ones who should judge justly. We have that power. So what happens when we don't judge justly? It's chaos. It's they walk about in darkness, all the pillars of the earth are shaken. It's like decreation language there.
Well, yeah, that was I believe that was the whole Gen 7, right? Or Gen 6, 7, right? The Nephilim had that power. God made them a man, which not an angel, which means he made them suzerain rulers of the earth.
Yeah, they're
or didn't make them. He permitted them the same suzerainty that man had. And what did the Nephilim do with that? Right, they caused nothing but chaos, and the chaos was so great that the waters of the abyss, like the waters of chaos, Tehom, waters of the deep, the primordial abyss, swallowed even the heights of the mountains. Like nothing was safe.
Yeah.
So yeah, we spoke. We said at the start we were concerned with scholarly virtue. That may have sounded like a piddly charge, but this is not just a matter of like what is and is not morally right. It is, but beyond that, there is absolutely an element of eschatological significance here.
Yeah.
It was an absolute betrayal of all the how do you put it? Like when you choose to take up that mantle to go from a tselem elokim, an image of God or an idol of God, to the likeness of God, that's not just a belief, belief, intellectual assent. That's a decision of the full heart and of the full head and of your full being. Right. When Jesus says you have to consecrate everything you have, like all your money, all your property, he may not mean you have to literally get rid of all your property, but he absolutely does mean that when you choose to walk that path, everything you have becomes consecrated to God. And then you are his agent. Or at least you should try.
If you mess that up, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah, you need to deny yourself, it says against all. Yeah. And not in the sense that we don't all make mistakes occasionally, but there are mistakes we can certainly avoid. And let's just say replicating the prime thing Jesus condemned intellectually is on the easier end.
Should be.
It very much should be. It very, very much should be. With that, I think this is a safe spot to end for the evening.
All right.
So if you enjoyed this stream, we'd be very grateful if you would like, comment, and subscribe. It boosts us in the algorithm. It makes us feel the warm and fuzzies inside. Love those warm fuzzies. I have been Wild Philosopher. He has been Hound of Heaven. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Good night.